getting to know your own biology and your own body. Every 6 months, when you are feeling good and healthy and happy, get everything done. Get your bloods done, get your hormones done, find out what your normal levels are.
Dr. Nichola Conlon has a PhD in molecular physiology and is an expert in cellular health, with a particular focus on the science of aging well. After a career in drug development, Dr. Nichola founded Nuchido Laboratories, driven by her belief that cutting-edge science should not lie hidden from the public. At Nuchido, she is passionate about translating the latest scientific breakthroughs into products that slow biological aging. Along with leading scientists at Nuchido, Dr. Nichola has identified the right combination of targets to restore cellular NAD+ production back to youthful levels, leading to the development of a breakthrough NAD+ booster called Nuchido Time Plus. Dr. Nichola is on a mission to democratize the science of longevity and has a passion for translating advanced science in a consumer-friendly manner.
NAD is really important for cellular maintenance and repair. As a general rule of thumb, all you need to remember is that if you have high levels of NAD, you will have lots of cellular energy production and lots of repair. And if you have low NAD,
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. NAD, really NAD+, is one of the top, if not the top subjects when it comes to longevity. If you search NAD on Google, you will find 121 million results. What is NAD+? Why is it important? What is its important to longevity? Our next speaker is going to clear the air and expand our knowledge about NAD+. Dr. Nichola Conlon has a PhD in molecular physiology and is an expert in cellular health, with a particular focus on the science of aging well. After a career in drug development, Dr. Nichola founded Nuchido Laboratories, driven by her belief that cutting-edge science should not lie hidden from the public. At Nuchido, she is passionate about translating the latest scientific breakthroughs into products that slow biological aging. Along with leading scientists at Nuchido, Dr. Nichola has identified the right combination of targets to restore cellular NAD+ production back to youthful levels, leading to the development of a breakthrough NAD+ booster called Nuchido Time Plus. Dr. Nichola is on a mission to democratize the science of longevity and has a passion for translating advanced science in a consumer-friendly manner. That's not easy to do. She regularly speaks from the science behind the symptoms of common aging complaints, educating and empowering people with the latest knowledge to reverse their biological age and improve their health span. Dr. Conlon, thank you for joining us today.
hello, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So before we get started talking about the amazing molecule NAD+, right? Can you give us some background first? What drove you to study molecular biology, right? You're a woman in that field, and that is unique in its own. And what was the path that led you to starting your NAD boosting company, Nuchido? By the way, you were awarded a top female founder in tech in 2021. You did not include that on the bio. I had to look it up. But give us a little bit of background. Why molecular biology, and then what got you down the path into Nuchido?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I'd love to say it was a really straightforward path, but it wasn't. I totally, everything sort of just not by accident, but sort of found its way to this point. And I honestly never knew what I wanted to do. I never knew what I wanted to be. I just knew I've always been really interested in biology, really interested in how the body works. For as long as I can remember, I've just thought it's fascinating that we are alive and that somehow everything that's going on beneath our surface is keeping us functioning. So that's what led me down a career or the training in molecular physiology, which is really understanding what's going on at the cellular level. So what's happening beneath the surface at all, every minute, every second of the day to keep us ticking. So that was very academic focused. I'd obviously did my degree, my master's, my PhD. But then I decided that probably academia wasn't for me, and I wanted to find ways of, translating this science into products or drugs or whatever that may help people. So the area that I specialized in for my PhD was all about looking at the sort of bioavailability of drugs and supplements and nutrients and how they go from the gut and actually get into our blood and then more importantly into our cells where they perform their function. So naturally, that kind of led down a path for a career in drug development because I, maybe it's a bit naively at the time, thought, oh, let's develop drugs because that's how we can get the science to people. So I worked firstly in cancer therapy, looking into immunotherapies. And then one day, my boss at the time said, Nichola, we're going to move you onto a different project and you are going to look at drugs to slow aging. And I was like, what? That sounds a bit crazy because this was like
is that even an option, right? Aging is a thing that you can't do anything about? Yeah.
Yeah, because up until this point, my background wasn't in aging biology. I knew bits about it, but it wasn't in that space. And so I was like, okay, that's pretty out there, but let's go with it because this was like a decade ago. So I ended up running projects in that company that were looking at molecules that were designed to slow cellular aging, with the idea that aging is our biggest risk factor for every disease, pretty much, that drugs companies are trying to target. Therefore, if you can slow cellular aging just a little bit, can you impact multiple age-related diseases in one go? And at the time, there was a lot of evidence coming out to show that actually you could. So it was a really exciting thing to be involved in. But there were two things that really bothered me about drug development. The first was my mission was, how do we get this science out to people now? And drug development takes a very, very long time. You're looking at 15 years, especially when we're looking at these types of therapies. And also, quite often, a lot of the molecules that we were testing in the lab that seemed to work really well were not actually drug molecules. They were natural molecules. They were things that were, commonly approved for supplements, things out of foods, even, that sometimes worked even better than the drugs. But because they weren't patentable by the drugs companies, they weren't interested in giving them the research that they deserve. And I was like, this is crazy. We have things that work really well, have good safety profiles, and they're never ever, they're available now and they're never going to see the light of day or get the research they deserve when they could be really useful. So I left in 2017. I founded my company, which is Nuchido Laboratories, and our mission is, how do we take all those non-drug molecules and give them the research they deserve, and most importantly, so we can get this research translated into consumer products so that people can benefit from this longevity science now.
Okay, so I've got two questions. So one is the origin of Nuchido, the name Nuchido. That sounds like it probably has a nice story behind it. And then when you were working at the drug company, were you focused on NAD at that point, or was it after you left the drug company that you're like, okay, I've identified the thing that I want to try and address?
Yeah, so I'll answer that one first. So basically, I wasn't just focused on NAD. What I was focused on, and still am, are all of the hallmarks of aging. So the 12 root cellular causes that are driving aging at the cellular level. It's been shown that if you can impact these, then you can reduce or reverse cellular aging. So NAD was one thing that really stood out to me because it's not a hallmark itself of aging, but it's something that you can seem to affect that has an impact on all of the hallmarks of aging in one go. So that's why it was particularly interesting. But no, I was involved in research on lots of other areas of research, of aging research. And the second question was about Nuchido. So where does the name come from? Good question. Well, there are various places in the world called blue zones. They've become a little bit more famous recently because there was a Netflix documentary recently about them. But there are areas of the world where people seem to live to supercentenarian age, over the ages of 100, 110 even. And a famous one is Okinawa in Japan. And there they have a saying, which is nushi gasui, which is food is the path to long life. And in Japanese, do is way. So we sort of loosely took a bit of that famous phrase and put it with do, and it was Nuchido. So it's kind of a made up word, but it loosely translates to path to long life.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's quite hard to find names that people don't already have.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's a great combination of names in the blue zone, like with the focus on longevity. That's pretty awesome. You know, that's usually true. The intelligence behind the name is kind of cool. All right, so let's jump into NAD and maybe lead into this. You had 12 options, right? 12 root causes of cellular aging, and you touched on this a little bit. Why did you choose NAD? Why is NAD so important, and what happens to our NAD plus, and it's NAD plus, right? Levels as we age.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the hallmarks of aging are quite famous in the longevity space. They are essentially the 12 things that are going wrong in our cells to cause all the chaos that happens as we get older. Everything that we experience on the outside, it's always going back to this cellular root cause and these 12 hallmarks of aging. And initially, there was a lot of research looking at, well, how do we target each individual hallmark? So, for example, just to name a couple, you've got things like DNA damage, inflammation, cellular senescence. So there was a lot of focus on like, okay, how can we develop things to only get rid of senescent cells, or how can we develop things to activate DNA repair or reduce inflammation, and, you know, really focusing on these individual hallmarks. But as the research progressed, what's been found and agreed upon is that actually to have the most beneficial effect on aging, you actually need to impact multiple hallmarks because they're actually all interconnected. So, for example, DNA damage actually drives cellular senescence. Cellular senescence is driving inflammation. They're all interconnected. So if you really want to have an impact, you need to affect multiple hallmarks in one go. And this is where NAD is really interesting, because NAD is one of the only molecules that's been found that seems to have an impact, a positive impact, on multiple of these hallmarks.
Okay, so NAD is a good thing to focus on. What exactly? Okay, so it's NAD or NAD plus. I saw that in two places. So please address like what's correct and does it matter? And then what exactly is NAD plus?
Yeah, so NAD is often referred to in a few different ways. You'll either have NAD with the plus, or you'll have NADH. And that's because of the role it plays in the body as a redox molecule. So it actually very easily loses and gains electrons. And when it loses and gains electrons, that's when it flips between NADH or NAD plus. But many people just ignore both of them and just call it NAD. So there isn't really a right or a wrong way. It's more of a loose term to avoid having to say nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is a bit of a mouthful.
Well, I'm appreciative of both descriptions. And okay, so why it has these positive impacts? What does aging have to do with NAD?
So NAD, it's basically a natural molecule that's found in every single cell in your body, and it's important for hundreds of different reactions. Actually, if you didn't have it in your body, you'd die within 30 seconds because it's so important for many cellular functions. But I guess the two things that it's most famous for are firstly cellular energy production. So it helps to take the food that you eat and convert it into the energy that your cells need to function, which is ATP, and this happens in the mitochondria. It's part of a cycle called the Krebs cycle. So this has been known for many, many years that NAD is important for energy production. But the other thing that it's famous for as well, which is more newly discovered, shall we say, is that NAD is really important for cellular maintenance and repair, or more importantly, keeping all of these cellular maintenance and repair processes turned up. So as a general rule of thumb, all you need to remember is that if you have high levels of NAD, you will have lots of cellular energy production and lots of repair. And if you have low NAD, energy production goes down and repair also goes down. So the issue that we have is that NAD has been found to decline during aging. So when we're born, we have really high levels, and as we're getting older, these levels are going down. And this decrease is actually quite significant. You're looking at around 50% reduction in your NAD levels every 20 years. And this is from birth. So like by the time you're 20, it's halved. By the time you're 40, that's halved again, 60, and so on. And that's an issue, because if NAD goes down, it means not only is energy production going down, so the cells can't function as well, but also repair is getting turned down. And that means we start to notice a lot of damage accumulating in the cells. And quite a lot of this damage then manifests as a lot of the signs and symptoms that we associate with the aging process.
Okay, so energy. I think we all want more energy, right? Certainly, those of us who are aging, right, who are significantly past our 20s. And then repair, like that feels natural, right? Like we go exercise now as we get older, and it feels like it takes a lot longer. Although I try, and I have 13-year-old twins, and I look at them, and I never remember complaining about being sore when I was their age. So I'm like, maybe it's just because I don't remember it, as opposed to not being sore. No, they're sore, right? Like my son participates in soccer, my daughter's a swimmer, and they get sore. It just feels good to know that 13-year-olds get sore, and then they just recover faster.
Yeah. I always say, when people say, just really sum it up quickly what NAD is doing, I always say, well, when you see a young child running around nonstop, even after no sleep at the night time, and then they fall over, bump themselves, and like 2 days later, they're fine, their cut's healed, that is NAD.
Okay, good. So it's not good. It's something that we can turn back on. That's one of the important things. Now, what is the conventional wisdom, right? Like I said, there's 121 million results when you search NAD, and there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there. What is the conventional wisdom about boosting NAD?
Well, when it was first realized that restoring NAD could actually help to alleviate some of the symptoms of aging, there was obviously a huge amount of interest in how can we actually do this. So the first sort of things that came around were, well, we'll just put some pure NAD in a pill and we'll swallow it, or we'll do an IV infusion of pure NAD. Now, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. NAD, because it's a redox molecule, is really chemically unstable, and that means it flips between all sorts of different forms and degrades really easily outside of the cells. So you absolutely cannot put pure NAD in a pill. It will not survive the gut. Never mind, it won't even survive sitting in the pill bottle. So that's not a good idea. So the other option was IVs. We can infuse pure NAD in, we can make it up fresh, we can avoid having to put it in pills, which avoids the gut. But then there was another obstacle that was encountered, and that is that NAD is actually quite a big molecule in terms of what our cells like to let in. So things can't just pass freely over our cell membranes. And whilst an IV will get it into the blood, it doesn't get it into the cells, because the cells do not let the large NAD molecule pass in. And NAD doesn't actually do very much at all in the blood. It needs to be inside the cells to perform its function. So the next sort of way of thinking was, okay, if we're having these issues, why don't we use a smaller molecule? So why don't we use the raw materials that our body uses to make NAD? And these are called precursors. Now, the most famous precursors for boosting NAD, they used as supplements, and they would be the likes of NMN, which, if you know anything about NAD, you've probably heard of NMN, or NR. And these are both vitamin B3 derivatives. So nicotinamide is another one. These are all precursors, and they're all the raw material that your body can use to make NAD. And the sort of theory behind this is that they're small enough to get into most cells, and that means if you give the cell more of the raw material that it needs, hopefully you'll get more NAD out of the other end. So that is up until very recently, the best ways that were thought of trying to boost NAD. But what we now realize is actually scientifically, they don't actually make that much sense when you look at the reasons why NAD actually declines.
Okay, so that's a leading end of a statement. So, all right. So, A couple things. Yeah, the first thought is, hey, let's just ingest pure NAD. I don't know if you know this. I just learned this recently. ATP, right, which is the energy source. I would have assumed that wasn't something that you could supplement. It turns out I think you can. And so from one study I read, that I just find that fascinating, and it's in the same ballpark. But NAD actually not only needs to get in the cell, it needs to get into the mitochondria, right? I think there's a barrier between just being in a cell and getting into the mitochondria. I don't know how challenging that is.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
is exactly that. There's two hurdles it needs to get over. It does have functions inside the cell, but then it's also extremely important, as we mentioned, in the mitochondria, and that's another cell membrane to get across. So again, there's the little transport proteins within these membranes that can allow NAD in and out, or it gets made inside of the area where it's actually needed.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So those techniques, the precursors, have a flaw. Talk about, like, wrap up that flaw, and then what are the real solutions? Like, why are those flawed? And then, yeah, why is it just flawed to throw in more raw ingredients? That because it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And the reason is because the reason our NAD declines, well, first of all, there's absolutely no evidence that the reason our NAD declines is because the body has a lack of raw materials. Actually, what all the science says is that it's the main NAD production pathways and enzymes in our cells that become dysfunctional as we get older. So you have a pathway in your cells when they are young and healthy and producing a lot of NAD called the salvage pathway. And what this does is it makes all of the NAD we need inside of the cells. And basically, as NAD is used up by repair processes, by longevity proteins like the sirtuins, it then gets split apart. It gets broken down into precursors like nicotinamide. These precursors will then be scooped up by this recycling pathway called the salvage pathway, and it will be recycled into fresh NAD without any external precursors, without anything coming from the outside. It just keeps going round and round. And if you think about it, it's a really clever way for the cell to make sure it's always got an optimal supply of NAD, because as use of NAD goes up, it means more precursors are there to then be recycled back into fresh NAD again. So this is now known that the way our cells make all our NAD, pretty much all our NAD, is via this pathway. But the issue that we have as we get older is there's an enzyme called NAMPT, which is another acronym because it's a really long word, NAMPT, that declines with age. And what this means is that our cells can't recycle those precursors. They can't take those precursors and form them into fresh NAD again. So if you, think of the cell as a factory, and this factory has stopped producing its NAD, and you went into that factory and you looked around and you saw all the machines were broken, would you say, let's just order more raw material and let's ignore the fact that all the machines are broken, and surely that's going to increase production? You just wouldn't. You'd be like, we need to fix these machines. Yep. So now it's really, well established that this is the root cause of NAD decline. The main root cause is the decline in this key enzyme. And actually, to restore cellular NAD, what we need to do is switch back on that enzyme.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes. Send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code. That'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast. Okay, so that enzyme is like, I like your factory example. We'll call that enzyme the electricity of the factory, right? And if there is no electricity in the factory and you order a bunch of raw materials, nothing happens. So let's get that electricity back going up. That's very interesting. So you've put together a supplement that addresses, I think more than just that, right? More than just the NAMPT. Talk about maybe some of the other pathways that you try to address in your solution.
Yeah. So that was the simple answer to why NAD declines, that, we have this enzyme that helps to produce and recycle it all, but it declines with age. Actually, just with anything in biology, it's not as straightforward as that. And there's often multiple different things that are going on. So just as important as the decline in this enzyme is actually other factors such as inflammation. So what we know is that chronic low-grade inflammation causes a massive, massive drain on our NAD levels. And that's because as we get older, chronic inflammation causes the expression of an enzyme called CD38 on the membrane of a lot of our cells. Now, in normal physiology, CD38, what it does is it drives inflammation. But when we are older and have chronic low-grade inflammation just burning away all the time underneath, this CD38 enzyme remains active. And CD38 uses NAD as its fuel. And when it's constantly active, it's constantly burning up NAD. And just to put this into perspective of how much it uses, for every one turn of its enzymatic cycle, it uses around 100 molecules of NAD. Wow. In comparison to something like a DNA repair enzyme that also uses NAD as a fuel, that uses more like 5 or 6 molecules. So you can see that if you have any chronic inflammation or any overexpression of this enzyme, it's going to massively deplete NAD levels. So when you start combining things like inflammation, as well as a lack of the enzyme to recycle NAD, this is when you really start to see issues with NAD decline. Other things, and other things that seem to also, add up as a consequence are problems with methylation. So when our recycling pathway in our cell is not working properly, it means that as NAD is being massively used up by inflammatory processes, it's getting broken down, and it's getting broken down into precursors. And if your enzymatic pathway is not working properly, those precursors start to build up in the cell. And cells don't like it when things build up. So the cell's like, oh my goodness, we've got all this waste building up. How do we get rid of it? And the way that our cells get rid of the buildup product of the breakdown of NAD, which is nicotinamide, is they stick a little methyl group on, which is like a tag that signals the cell to, send it down the waste chute. Now, methyl groups are actually really important in our cells for lots of different things like DNA repair, epigenetics. And this means our important methyl groups start getting used up for this unimportant waste management that it shouldn't be doing. So this can lead to methyl donor depletion, which then has other knock-on effects in the cell. So you can very quickly see that things like just taking NMN don't actually fix any of these issues that are going on beneath the surface, because when anything's declining in the body, it's happening for a reason. So actually, usually the best approach is to look at the reason and try and fix it rather than ignore it, and just try and supplement with something else.
All right, so we've got 3 kind of key pathways that start getting involved here, right? The NAMPT, inflammation, and methylation. Is there anything else that it's incredibly complex, but is there anything else that's jumping in and in fact being affected or affecting really the NAD production or availability?
Those are the main things. Those are the top ones that at the moment, science is constantly evolving, but those are the top things that seem to be mainly contributing to NAD decline. And certainly if you compare a young and an old cell, those are the things that are really standing out, that are different.
Okay, so the deleterious effect is you're not making the NAD. You're actually the inflammation is having an impact on that because it uses up a lot more NAD than is typical. And then you look at methylation, where you're not just affecting the factory that doesn't have the electricity. You're actually, the other factories are donating their stuff to your factory because it's not working properly, and then those factories aren't working well either. So this is a deleterious situation. Is there anything that we can do naturally? I think in one of your interviews, you mentioned intermittent fasting. I don't know if I heard the whole thing. What are some of the natural things that we can do that, and they're probably very short-lived, but what are some of the natural things that we can do to boost NAD?
So interestingly, some of the things that we know are very good for longevity have been known to have quite a lot of their mechanism of action or their effect by boosting NAD. And the top
Mm.
two things are exercise and fasting, as you just mentioned. And the way that both of these things boost NAD is that they put our cells in a state of energy stress. Okay, so when our cells have a depletion of energy through exercise or fasting, our cells set off a little alarm bell sensor, and this sensor is called AMPK. And what AMPK does is it tells the cell we have a state of energy stress. We need to upregulate things that are going to help the cell survive the period of stress. And one of its main targets is the NAMPT enzyme. So it's the NAD production enzyme. So you fast or you exercise, it sets off AMPK. It tells our bodies to switch on NAD production, and NAD levels go up. And what that means is that you've got more NAD in your cells to, first of all, create more energy via the mitochondria, but secondly, to be ready to power any repair that has to happen, because this is like a stress situation. So, our bodies they're not getting the nutrients, they're using a lot of energy, there's oxidative stress from metabolism. The NAD needs to be ready to counteract any repair that needs to happen. So that is how those two things actually naturally lead to increasing NAD levels in our cells.
Okay. I want to get, because you have a published paper, and I want to talk about that because I think that's really important. When you think about fasting, I'm assuming there's some data that's supporting, hey, when you're fasted or when you're fasting, right, you have NAD production goes up. Is that full-on calorie restriction? Is that intermittent fasting? Is there some parallels there? Do you have any idea about that delta?
Yeah, both of those things activate AMPK. So it's anything that is activating AMPK. AMPK is like sitting at the top of the pathway. When that's activated, it's signaling downstream to switch on that NAMPT enzyme and that NAD recycling within the cell. So any form of energy stress, as long as it's enough to activate AMPK.
Excellent. And so you have published a paper. That's awesome. I love to be talking with people who are actually publishing papers. And I believe it's a placebo-controlled, double-blind, like you've just went through and said, let me tick every box that makes this an important and viable study. Can you talk about that study?
Yeah. So when I was investigating NAD, it was very clear to me that all of the ways that we've just mentioned to boost NAD just didn't address any of these root causes of NAD decline. So we wanted to look at how we could actually develop a formulation that could actually fix the root causes of NAD decline. So we developed that formulation. It's got many different ingredients in that are designed to not only boost levels of the NAMPT enzyme, but also inhibit inflammatory CD38 to inhibit this methylation process that is happening that shouldn't be in our cells, and as well provides some precursor. So it's basically making sure that cellular factory is fully functional and all the machines are fixed and the electricity is fixed and all the right stuff's coming in and out at the right times. And, we wanted to prove that actually this was a viable way to actually restore NAD. So we did do a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study in humans, not just cells,
Yeah.
as a lot of formulations are tested on. And, we wanted to look at, first of all, do we boost NAD? Which, yes, we did. We saw even after 7 days that there was a significant increase in NAD levels. We also wanted to look at the mechanism of action. Were we actually restoring cellular NAD levels? So we measured levels of the NAMPT enzyme in the cells of the participants in the trial. And again, we could see that after 28 days, we were actually boosting levels of this key enzyme. So this was the only time that it's been proven in a human clinical study to show that there is something that we can actually be doing to fix the root causes of NAD decline and actually just switch back on natural NAD production in the cell. You don't need to fill a cell with precursors or fill a cell with NAD. You just need to switch back on what our cells naturally have inside. So that was like 2 ticks. It was like, yes, we boost NAD, and yes, it's restoring the enzyme. But what are the downstream effects? So we also looked at, what else would we expect to be happening? And we saw a reduction in inflammation in these participants. We saw a reduction in glycation, which is another, biomarker of aging. And we also measured biological age. Which is a way to look at measuring cellular aging or the rate of cellular aging, and saw a reduction in biological age in the cells of these participants as well.
That's phenomenal. When you're looking at the AMPT in cells, are you taking biopsies? How did you figure that out?
So to look at the enzyme, the NAMPT enzyme, basically you can take a blood sample and you can spin out a fraction of the blood called the PBMC. So these are essentially the white blood cells. And then you can extract the cells, and then you essentially perform it's a scientific technique called a Western blot. And this measures levels of the enzymatic protein that are found within the cells.
So the scientific community decided that Western blot is easy enough that we don't need an acronym for it. I like that.
One of the few things.
One of the few things we can actually say. All right. So which biological age test did you? Because I know I think there's methylation. I had a conversation with MyDNAge, which is more complex than just methylation, and then glycogen is glycanage is on my radar. Which one did you end up using?
Glycanage.
Yeah. So your impact on inflammation and glycation are going to show up right on there. By the way, according to glycanage, I'm 21 years old, which is 33. I think it's 33. Yeah. Years younger than my actual age. So
that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So of course, it's interesting. We've had conversations here at the office, like, do they only ever give low answers so that you like the test? And I was like, no, that wouldn't work. And by the way, I have a DNA age test that showed me 7 years older in the middle, and that was in the middle of the pandemic. My current theory is that it was related to actual COVID. In that particular test, it will show, a reduced age.
That's very interesting. And so glycanage, for me, I'm 20. But, so that's another young one. But we've done a lot of testing over a lot of different people, and I have seen some that are definitely not young. So, I can.
So it's a legit test.
There is the other end of the scale. They don't keep everyone happy.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the reality is if they're keeping everyone happy, eventually word will get out and no one will use it, right? Like it'll just lose all credibility. So I think that's not the case. So really fascinating work. I have some wrap up questions that we'll dig into. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
So for me, it's all about, I don't have an age. I just want to live as long as I'm healthy and independent and fully functional. Like I'll go to any age that I can get to.
Yeah.
And I always, when I talk about longevity with people, I always say, well, if you could stay in the state that you are now, like, why wouldn't you want to stay around? So yeah, as long as I'm healthy, independent, not with chronic disease, I have my health span. As long as I have my health span, that's I wouldn't even put a number on it. Just keep going.
All right. So David Sinclair, in his book Lifespan, was like, hey, we could live forever. Dave Asprey has said his target is 180. Do you believe there's a limitation, or do you believe we'll eventually, whether it's soon or way in the future, do you think we'll eventually be able to solve this and live forever? Or where is your humans can only live to XYZ because of some factor?
I would be reluctant to say that there's a limit. I know there's been some studies recently that sort of argue that there is a upper limit. The way I look at it is that as humans, we've evolved to be very good at being young, but not very good at being old. And that the reason for that is because we, traditionally have never lived long enough to experience old age. So, nothing in our biology has been selected to make us being good at being old. It's only the last couple of 100 years that we actually have experienced these longer lifespans due to a very quick improvement in sanitation, healthcare, etc. And evolution simply can't keep up. But biology is very, very clever. And, you just need to look at how well our bodies look after themselves without much input and a lot of abuse from the outside. And we're, when we're young, beneath our 20s, even 30s, we are just in great health, for majority of people. And those processes that keep us in that good health do not disappear. The genetics remains the same throughout the whole of our lifespans. It just, different bits get turned on and off. Different pathways and processes get turned on and off, but it never disappears. So I think when we're looking at in the future, things like, epigenetic reprogramming, which is looking at switching youthful patterns of genes back on and, those processes that keep us good at being young. I think when we crack that, that's when we will be like, oh my goodness, we actually could stay in good health for a long time.
Good. That's a good surprise. All right. So 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts for longevity and a longer health span that you would share.
My favorite one is getting to know your own biology and your own body. I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge that we're all individuals. And, whilst we may talk about protocols and things that sort of are a one size fit all, the reality is they're not. And a really important thing is getting to know what your normal biomarker levels are for really common things, just like get your blood work done. Every 6 months when you are feeling good and healthy and, happy, get everything done, get your bloods done, get your hormones done, find out what your normal levels are. Because your normal is not normal to what your doctor will compare you to. When you suddenly turn up one day going, I feel rubbish, you get your bloods done and then they look and go, oh, well, it's within a normal range, you're fine. And you're like, no, I'm not, I don't feel good. So if you can have those baselines and you keep tracking it, you're going to know when things suddenly start to change and you're going to very easily be able to pinpoint what it is that's changing. So I think, I always say to a lot of people before they start doing any, investing a lot of money in a lot of longevity practice, supplements, things like that, just get the basics in place first.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else? So we've got, understand yourself with blood work. Is there another tip, trick, shortcut that pops to mind?
Yeah, I think as well the genetic side of it. So it's related. Get your genetics done. Look at what you are perhaps predisposed to. Is there likely to be issues further in your life that you can start addressing now? Just look at things like you can very easily look if you have an increased susceptibility to things like Alzheimer's. I know that's not what everyone wants to hear, but knowledge is power. And, we are advancing technologies. We know there are, different supplements, different things that you can be implementing when you're young in your life to reduce that risk. Your genes doesn't mean that you're going to get it, but it can increase your likelihood. But it's massively your lifestyle as well. They estimate that 20% is your genes, 80% is the lifestyle. So if you're more understanding of what your genes are, you can actually take, approaches within your lifestyle to just really try and increase the health span as long as possible and remain on the planet for as long as you can, so that you have this opportunity for these advances in science to happen.
Excellent. And Dr. Conlon, how can people contact you?
So the best way is to follow me on Instagram. That's where I do a lot of my, connections with people, answering questions. I do a lot of education on not only NAD, but everything to do with aging and biohacking aging. And then for more company related stuff, it would be www.nuchido.com.
And what's your handle on Instagram?
It's just at Dr. Nichola Conlon, just my name.
Nichola. Okay, excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think just being involved in the aging space we're just at this really incredible inflection point. Back when I got involved in it 10 years ago, like I used to talk to people about it and they used to think I was crazy. They were like, what are you're a lunatic, you can't slow aging. But now the evidence is just so strong that even the general public now and people that don't really follow the space as intensely as I have are now starting to get excited about it. And for me, that's exciting because people are now starting to rethink the way we think about aging and, really see this as, wow, what a great opportunity this could be, and really start to learn and listen a little bit more about the science and think, yeah, maybe I might start doing a little bit of fasting, or, I might take some supplements or something like that. So I just think the whole space excites me. The fact that for the first time in human history, we actually are, and many people are now starting to believe that aging is something that we can truly reverse.
You can actually have an impact on. That's awesome. All right. You can find her at Dr. Nichola Conlon, and that's DrNichola Conlon. That's on Instagram. And at her website, Nuchido, Nuchido.com. She's got references to the paper, to the research that she did there. So I would go check that out. That's really exciting. Dr. Conlon, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.